I've carried this secret for years, pretending it never happened. Everyone thinks they know the story, but they've only heard the version that keeps me safe. The truth is messier, and it's the reason I still can't sleep at night. I was making my rounds at this busy ski resort when I noticed something you never want to see. Tiny snowballs tumbling on their own, fresh debris scattered at the base of certain slopes. Those are red flags in avalanche country. My gut nodded. I grabbed my radio and called up Blake, the resort manager. Told him we needed to shut things down immediately. But Blake, he didn't even hesitate. Absolutely not. It's our biggest weekend of the year. Closing would cost us over $1 million. Just today. I tried to keep my voice steady. Blake, I'm serious. These cracks weren't here yesterday. His tone went ice cold. My mountain. My rules. Mark it safe or I'll find someone who will. And if you want to keep those mountain credentials, you'll do it now. Then my phone buzzed. My brother, Tommy. Bringing Carmen up for her first black diamond run. My stomach dropped. I texted back immediately. Don't. The mountain isn't safe. Stick to the bunny slopes. LOL. Okay, Mom. Blake just said over the PA the conditions are perfect. I fired back. Blake's wrong. Please don't do this. Stop being dramatic. Carmen's excited. We're already here. That was it. I wasn't signing anything. Screw Blake. I started skiing straight to the dangerous zones, planting avalanche warning flags without a shred of authorization. I'd rather lose my job than bury my family. Then came the first whumph. The ground shifted under my skis. The entire slope settled. Blake's voice came crackling over my radio. Jake, get back to base. Now. I ignored him. A small slide broke loose on the next peak. Maybe 50 tons of snow. Enough to make people on the slope stop and look up. Is that normal? I heard someone ask. Right on cue, Blake jumped on the PA. Folks, nothing to worry about. Just avalanche control work from our grooming crew. My phone started blowing up. Texts from other patrollers. Temp spike, 10 degrees. Saw a slab break on the north face. Blake's blocking the report. Then another whumph. Louder. Close enough that people felt it through their boots. I saw a mom grab her kid's hand and head downhill. Blake's voice again. Those settling noises mean the snow is stabilizing. Conditions are better than ever at the summit. But I could see it. Families leaving the slopes, the lift line thinning out. I tried Tommy again. The mountain is literally falling apart. Already in line for the summit lift. Stop being paranoid. Blake must have realized I wasn't backing down, because suddenly security was looking for me. His voice on the radio was pure venom. Jake, you're ruining our biggest weekend. You'll never work anywhere again. Then another slide ripped free. Bigger this time, hundreds of tons, trees snapping like matchsticks. Blake went into full spin mode on the PA. Controlled detonation, making the mountain safer. Keep skiing, everyone. But seasoned skiers were bailing. The gondola line kept shrinking. Everyone, except Tommy and Carmen. They were halfway up. More slides now, constant little ones, like the mountain was warning us it was about to clear its throat. I fired more flares. Blake got back on the PA and told everyone to ignore them. Said a mentally unstable ex-employee was causing a scene. Then it came, the sound no one mistakes for anything else. A deep, rolling roar from inside the mountain. Conversations stopped mid-word. Every head turned toward Black Diamond. Oh, crap, someone whispered. And then chaos. People ran. Parents scooped up their kids. Blake's voice tried to hold them. Please evacuate in an ord. The rest was drowned out by the avalanche. The entire face of Black Diamond broke loose in one monstrous wave of snow. I raised my binoculars and my blood went cold. Tommy and Carmen, tiny specks near the summit, right in its path. When it was over, the silence was worse than the noise. I started digging. First voice I heard was a teenage girl, half buried, snowboard still strapped to one foot. I pulled her out. She vomited instantly, lips blue. My dad. My dad was right next to me. More voices. Everywhere. I dug like my own life depended on it. I found Carmen first, unconscious in a tree well, face purple but breathing. Then Tommy's beacon pinged. 6 feet down. I tore at the snow with bare hands after shredding my gloves. When I reached him, his eyes were open, but nothing behind them. No breath, no pulse. I started CPR. Refused to let anyone else take over. 3 minutes later, he coughed up blood and pink foam. But he was breathing. Helicopters landed within 20 minutes. Paramedics swarmed. I saw one father carry his son's lifeless body down the slope. Then Blake appeared, clean, pressed, not a snowflake on him. Picking his way through like he didn't want to dirty his shoes. He went straight to a state police captain and, loud enough for me to hear, said, "This is Jake's fault. He caused panic. If he hadn't interfered, everyone would have evacuated safely." 2 troopers took me to the command trailer while Blake schmoozed the board members rolling in with their luxury cars. Inside, Officer Dana Brown slid a recorder across the table and told me to start from the very beginning, when I first saw the instability. My hands wouldn't stop shaking as I told her everything. The whump sounds, Blake's threats, every warning sign he ignored. Hours later, they let me leave. At the hospital, Tommy lay sedated in the ICU, machines breathing for him. Carmen sat beside him, arm in a sling, her face covered in bandages. She told me the doctors weren't sure if his lungs would ever fully recover. Out the window, news vans filled the parking lot. And on the TV in the waiting room, Blake's face, telling the world it was all an unexpected natural disaster. The next morning, I was sitting in the hospital cafeteria, picking at a cup of bad coffee, when this guy in a suit worth more than my truck slides into the seat across from me. "Name's Carter," he says, all smooth and polished. "I'm the resort's attorney." He sets a document on the table, taps it with one manicured finger. "Sign this," he says, "and the resort will cover all your medical bills. All we need is your statement confirming you acted on your own. No authorization, when you planted those warning flags." I didn't even hesitate. I tore the paper in half, slow enough for him to watch, then dropped the pieces on the floor between us. My phone buzzed before the scraps even stopped fluttering. "Blake, you just made the biggest mistake of your life." That evening, my phone rang again. Melissa Crawford. Her voice was shaking as she told me she'd saved copies of every safety report I'd filed this season. Before Blake made her alter them, she'd kept the originals on her personal drive. She broke down crying when she told me 17 people were still missing under the snow. The next day, the Mountain Safety Board summoned me to an emergency hearing about my unauthorized actions. I walked into the conference room and found Blake already there, flanked by 3 lawyers, presenting doctored radio transcripts. The edits made it sound like I'd panicked for no reason and caused the chaos that led to those deaths. The board members looked at me like I'd lost my mind. By the end, they'd voted to suspend my credentials pending a full investigation. The next morning, Rachel Winters came to find me at Tommy's bedside. Her eyes were red, her voice raw from days of crying. Her daughter Emma had lost 3 toes to frostbite. Her daughter's best friend, Chloe, hadn't made it out alive. She showed me a video on her phone. Blake on the morning news, calling the avalanche an act of God that no one could have predicted. Later, Officer Brown called me in for a formal interview. She wanted every detail about Blake's PA announcements. She told me they had witnesses who heard him say the slides were controlled detonations to keep people on the mountain. But Blake's lawyers were already spinning it, claiming he was relying on my expertise as head of ski patrol. When I went to clean out my locker, no one said a word. Marcus, a rookie I trained last year, walked past without looking at me and slipped a USB into my hand. "Helmet cam from that morning," he whispered. "You can see the crown fractures." Then he kept walking. That afternoon, Blake held a press conference. He announced a memorial fund for victims, pledged full cooperation with investigators, and stood under the resort sign advertising discounted lift tickets to help the community heal. From my apartment window, I watched the parking lot fill up again like nothing had happened. On day 8, Tommy finally woke up for real. The first thing he did was claw at the breathing tubes, gasping, eyes wide with panic. Everything was white, he kept saying. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't breathe. Carmen blocked me from getting closer. She said Tommy had followed me up that mountain because he trusted me to know it was safe. 2 days later, I sat in my truck outside the resort. Families were unloading skis. Kids were laughing, chasing each other through the snow. Every laugh made my stomach twist, because all I could see was that father carrying his son's body through the avalanche debris. The resort looked exactly the same, as if 11 people hadn't died there. The next morning, Dr. Hayes found me at a coffee shop. He leaned in and told me how Blake's security had blocked them from setting up a medical station until the lawyers arrived. Cost them 12 minutes. He slid me his personal notes. I took photos of every page before sliding them back. The following day, a process server showed up at my door. Papers from the resort's lawyers. They were suing me for $3.2 million in economic damages from my reckless fear-mongering. My public defender looked at the filing and shook his head. They're trying to bankrupt you into silence. The next afternoon, Melissa asked me to meet her at a diner 2 towns over. She kept glancing over her shoulder before sliding me papers. Proof Blake had gotten a geology report 3 weeks before the avalanche warning about the instability. He'd buried it because fixing the problem would have meant shutting down during peak season. I photographed the documents before she snatched them back and slipped out through the kitchen door. The day after that, I drove Tommy to his first physical therapy appointment. The therapist measured his lung capacity at 40%. Said he'd never ski again. Might struggle with stairs for years. Tommy just stared at the ceiling the whole time, refusing to look at me, even when I tried to help him to the car. The next morning, the hearing resumed. Blake's lawyers came armed with weather data, claiming unprecedented conditions no one could have predicted. I countered with Marcus helmet footage, showing every glaring warning sign from that morning. The board muttered something about needing more time to deliberate. That evening, I walked out to find my truck tires slashed and the word killer spray-painted across my windshield. The security guard said their cameras malfunctioned for exactly that 1-hour window. A text came through from Blake. Shame about your truck. Mountain towns have strong feelings about people who hurt their economy. The next day, Officer Williams called. FBI was taking over. Multiple interstate commerce violations. She mentioned Blake's lawyer had already hired a crisis management firm that specialized in disaster deflection. That night, I sat with Carmen in Tommy's hospital room. She told me he woke up most nights thinking he was still buried under the snow. She looked hollow, her voice thin. She'd been so excited to learn to ski. Tommy just wanted to show her the mountain he loved. The next morning, I walked into town for groceries and felt eyes on me everywhere. The local paper had run an op-ed about rush to judgment and mountain tradition. The bartender who usually knew my order wouldn't meet my eyes when I passed. In a place where the economy lived and died by that resort, I was the guy who'd tried to shut it down. And then, the day after that, Rachel showed up at the resort's front entrance with a process server, and what looked like half the news crews in Colorado. I watched from the parking lot as Blake strutted out in his usual suit. He saw the cameras, pasted on his best concerned face. The process server handed him the papers. Rachel stood there, shaking, trying to say something about her daughter, but her voice cracked, and she broke down crying right there on live TV. Blake put a hand over his heart and said he understood a mother's grief. By that night, the news was already calling her an opportunist. The next morning, my phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to. It was a ski patroller from Vail. He said a bunch of them had been talking, and they'd all seen the same thing at their own resorts. Management pushing to keep runs open when they were dangerous, reports getting lost or altered. A guy from Breckenridge told me they'd fired him 2 years back for refusing to sign off on a slope that should have been closed. They had documents going back 5 years showing it was happening all over the place. But what happened to me? He said it was the worst case they'd ever seen. That afternoon, I drove to the hospital to see Tommy. He'd been awake for days, but wouldn't let me visit. When I walked in, he didn't look at me, just stared at the ceiling for what felt like forever. Then finally he asked, "Did you know how bad it was when you texted me that morning?" I told him everything. The deep whump sounds, The crown fractures forming. How Blake threatened to ruin my career if I didn't mark it safe. Tommy shut his eyes and whispered, "I should have listened." The very next day, a courier showed up at my door with a subpoena from Blake's legal team. They wanted my entire work history from every resort I'd ever patrolled. Within hours, they dug up some 6-year-old report where I'd marked a slope moderate risk that never slid. Their filing called it a pattern of incompetence, even though the assessment was right and no one had been hurt. Then the Colorado Attorney General announced a criminal investigation, only for Blake to immediately hire the former Attorney General as his defense lawyer. The news covered it like a celebrity scandal, complete with graphics and theme music instead of talking about the 11 people who died. That's when everything really started falling apart. My landlord knocked on my door and said he needed the apartment for family and gave me 30 days to get out. My bank froze my accounts over irregularities. My insurance company sent a letter dropping me because of the pending litigation. Melissa called me sobbing, said they knew she'd talked to me and she was being shipped off to Phoenix immediately. Before leaving, she dropped a box on my doorstep and ran to her car. Inside, 5 years of safety reports Blake had ordered destroyed. Every single one showed the same pattern: warnings ignored, slopes kept open. I was in the grocery store when Dr. Hayes found me in the cereal aisle. He glanced around before whispering that the resort's lawyers were pressuring the hospital to alter the triage timeline, make it look like delays were medical choices, not because security blocked access. He kept checking over his shoulder and said, "I've got kids. I can't lose my job." The next night, I went to the diner where rescue crews used to gather after shifts. My regular waitress wouldn't make eye contact. On the TV, Blake was at a press conference announcing a scholarship fund, while his lawyers fought victims' families in court. I ate my eggs alone while the whole room pretended I wasn't there. The day after, my address appeared online with a photo of my building and the words "Murderer Lives Here" in blood-red text. By evening, 20 people were outside with signs. Some resort employees afraid for their jobs, others just furious about the town's reputation. Carmen called from the hospital. Protesters were there too, screaming at anyone who talked to her or Tommy. The next morning, a blocked number called. A woman's voice. She was from the Denver Post. She'd been tracking resort safety violations for months and found Blake's name tied to 3 deaths at another resort 5 years ago. Sealed settlements. But she had the original complaints. She wanted my reports, my photos, everything. We met at a coffee shop outside town. I handed over every scrap I had, including pictures of the warning flags I'd set that morning. The next day, 2 FBI agents knocked on my door. They drove me to the federal building and questioned me for 6 hours. They had Blake's emails to investors, sent while 11 people were still buried, calling it a minor incident that was under control with minimal impact expected. They even showed me security footage of Blake standing in his office, watching the avalanche, then calmly walking to his computer to type those messages. When I got home, Carmen called. Tommy was being released, but he'd need oxygen tanks just to breathe. The next morning, I helped move him from the hospital bed to a wheelchair. It took 15 minutes because he had to stop and gasp for air every few steps. He looked at the wheelchair and muttered to no one in particular. I was supposed to teach kids to ski next season. His hands trembled just holding a cup of water. That afternoon, Blake's lawyers released heavily edited audio of my radio calls. They made it sound like I was babbling in a panic. The local news played it every hour with headlines calling me a rogue patrol officer. My old coworkers stopped answering my texts. When I saw one in the grocery store, he turned around and walked the other way. That night, Rachel called. She was rallying the other families. They made videos showing the victims as real people, not just numbers. By morning, they'd gone viral. People were finally asking why Blake was still in charge. The very next day, on my way to see Tommy, my brakes went soft. No matter how hard I pumped, nothing. I had to yank the emergency brake to stop. The mechanic said the brake lines were cut clean through with Pro Tools. Officer Brown couldn't prove who did it, but she put patrol cars on regular drive-bys past my place. Blake's desperate, she told me. Watch your back. The day after, I spent hours at the library digging through old news archives. Blake's name popped up at 4 different resorts over 15 years, 12 deaths. Everyone blamed on acts of God or patrol failures. The pattern was right there in black and white. Carmen called later, asking me to help with Tommy's breathing exercises because he'd only try when I was there. His grip was strong when he held my hand, but I could feel the fight in every breath. His face turned red, sweat beading on his forehead, just from trying to fill his lungs. The next morning, I drove past the resort just as the sun was coming up. Fresh snow covered everything, hiding the scars like nothing had ever happened. Families were unloading their cars for the early lifts, kids laughing and chasing each other through the lot. The mountain stood there, still and perfect, like it hadn't swallowed 11 people whole just weeks earlier. That afternoon, a certified letter landed in my mailbox. The state safety board had officially revoked my credentials, permanently, for reckless endangerment. Within the hour, Blake sent out a press release about vindication and professional standards. 18 years of a spotless safety record, gone. 2 nights later, I woke to pounding at my door. It was 2 a.m. Marcus stood there, helmet cam in hand, eyes wide. He pushed past me without a word, plugged it into my TV, and hit play. There was Blake, at the summit that morning, running his hand along the same fracture lines I'd reported, shaking his head. 10 minutes later, same footage showed him on a call with investors saying, "Conditions are perfect." Marcus said the camera was supposed to be off, but it hadn't been. I copied the footage to 3 separate drives while Marcus sat on my couch, sipping the coffee I made him. The next morning, the Denver journalist called. Her story was going live in an hour. When it hit, families from Blake's past resorts in Utah and Wyoming came forward. Suppressed warnings, threatened staff, deaths that could have been prevented. By noon, national outlets had picked it up. My phone didn't stop buzzing with interview requests. The very next day, a lawyer from Denver knocked on my door. She was taking our case pro bono. Sat at my kitchen table, telling me Blake's insurance company was backing away. They didn't cover criminal negligence. She filed subpoenas for 10 years of resort communications before she even finished her coffee. That afternoon, Tommy came over. I showed him the footage. He watched himself and Carmen boarding the lift while the mountain above them began to break apart. When the timestamp hit, just 15 seconds before the slide would have hit them, he whispered, "If we'd been any later, we'd be dead." He ran to my bathroom and threw up, then sat on the floor for 20 minutes. Blake called an emergency board meeting the next day. Someone leaked audio within hours, board members discussing liability mitigation and narrative control. Not one mention of the people who died. The clip went viral. That night, employees started texting me. The head of lift ops admitted Blake ordered him to keep the summit lift running after he raised safety concerns. Said he had 4 kids, but couldn't keep living with the truth buried. More workers came forward with similar stories. Rachel brought 5 other families to my apartment the next evening. We sat in my living room, surrounded by photos of the people they'd lost. Tommy listened quietly before realizing. He was the only adult to survive being completely buried. He told them he'd speak for everyone who couldn't. 2 days later, I was buying milk when Blake walked in with a camera crew. He shoved a mic in my face. "How does it feel to destroy hundreds of jobs?" I stayed calm. "How does it feel to value profit over 11 lives?" The clip split the town, half siding with Blake, half finally admitting they'd known something was wrong. The next morning, I drove to the mountain and found a memorial blooming at the base. Flowers, photos, crossed ski poles. Someone left a note. "We knew the truth. Some of us always did." Security kept clearing it away, but every day people brought more. 2 days after that, FBI agents arrived with search warrants. They hauled out servers, computers, boxes of files. They searched Blake's house too, taking 20 years' worth of documents. Local news filmed Blake shouting about government overreach as agents carried evidence right past him. The insurance company filed suit 2 days later, claiming Blake knew about the danger and concealed it. They found proof he'd bought extra coverage just 2 days before the avalanche. 3 words in that filing made my stomach drop. He knew everything. Tommy gave his testimony from his hospital bed, oxygen mask on, cameras rolling, lawyers trying to cut him off 17 times. He described the avalanche, being trapped in concrete, knowing he was going to die there. The judge shut Blake's team down and let Tommy finish. 2 days later, Dr. Hayes called. He was revising his official report to include the 12-minute security wasted blocking medics. He said Blake might ruin him, but he couldn't keep lying. On day 58, a town meeting erupted into chaos when one of Blake's own investors demanded answers about the buried geology report. Blake snapped, calling the crowd, "Ungrateful parasites living off my mountain." Everyone saw exactly who he was. 2 nights later, the families held a candlelight vigil. Half the town showed up, even with Blake threatening to fire employees who attended. Hundreds of candles glowed, and for the first time since the avalanche, I didn't feel completely alone. The next morning, the state pulled the resort's operating license. Blake's emergency injunction? Denied. The judge said public safety came before profit. The resort shut down, for the first time in 40 years. Outside the courthouse, Blake's former assistant handed me a flash drive. 2 years of recordings. On it, Blake calculating acceptable casualty rates and telling investors lawsuits would be cheaper than closing. Her hands shook as she gave it to me. 2 days later, Tommy called from the hospital, Carmen crying in the background. He'd walked 10 feet to a chair without help. The doctors had said he might never walk again, but he was determined to walk into court. The FBI uncovered offshore transfers Blake had made since the avalanche. They froze what they could, but millions were gone. His lawyer quit. On day 70, I went back to the avalanche site, stood where it had all started, staring at the new warning signs. The mountain didn't care about greed, lawsuits, or the dead. It just was. But we'd ignored its warnings. 2 days later, a board member called. Blake was being voted out that afternoon. I drove up. News vans were already swarming. After 3 hours, word came. Blake was officially terminated. But he refused to leave his office. Through the glass, we saw him at his desk with 2 guards blocking the door. State police arrived. 20 minutes later, they walked him out in handcuffs, face flushed with rage. His mugshot was online by nightfall. 2 days after that, the town council held hearings about the resort's future. Families spoke about living in fear for years because Blake controlled the town's jobs. The mayor said Blake had held the whole place hostage with money and threats. On day 76, Marcus came to my apartment with 3 other patrollers. They were starting an independent safety company, and they wanted me as an advisor, credentials or not. They swore they'd never let management overrule safety again. 2 days later, news broke. Blake had been arrested on federal charges: criminal negligence, wire fraud, conspiracy, and 11 counts of involuntary manslaughter. His new lawyer looked barely old enough to rent a car. The grand jury indicted him, and 3 board members who'd known about the buried safety reports. Officer Davis called to tell me my documentation had saved the case. Enough evidence for consecutive life sentences. On day 82, Tommy came over. We watched old ski videos from when we were kids. He told me he didn't blame me, he blamed himself for not listening and Blake for everything else. We didn't hug, but something shifted between us. On day 84, Rachel organized the families to sue Blake personally. Her lawyers found a way to pierce corporate protection. Emma sat beside her in a wheelchair, 3 toes gone to frostbite. Rachel said Blake wouldn't hide behind the resort ever again. 2 days later, Blake's wife filed for divorce and handed over years of secret recordings. Him plotting to move money offshore, planning escape routes to countries without extradition. On day 88, the resort reopened under new management with the strictest safety protocols in the country. Families returned, but kids who'd been there that day wouldn't go near the slopes. Parents held their children's hands tighter. Some people just came, stood at the base, and left without skiing. The mountain was still beautiful, but you could feel it, the shadow of what had happened here. And that shadow wasn't going anywhere. 2 days later, I was called downtown to the prosecutor's office to prep for testimony. When I walked in, I saw boxes stacked to the ceiling, evidence, recordings, documents. 400 hours of audio, the lead prosecutor said. 10,000 documents. 60 witnesses ready to testify. Then she slid a file toward me, Blake's own emails. He had documented everything. Every safety violation, every cover-up. Convinced it would somehow protect him legally. She leaned back in her chair. In 20 years, I've never had a case this strong. He practically wrote his own conviction. 2 weeks later, the FBI called, and what they told me made my stomach sink. They dug into Blake's past and found something no one expected. The agent spread documents across the table. A mine collapse in Montana 15 years ago. Different name, Robert Harrison, but same face in the photos. Same pattern. A safety inspector warned about unstable tunnels. Harrison fired him. 23 miners died when the main shaft collapsed. He disappeared before charges could stick. Then came the real gut punch. 3 more incidents in different states. Every time the same story. Safety warnings ignored, people dead, Blake disappearing and reappearing somewhere else with fresh paperwork and a new name. 2 days after that bombshell, 3 former board members came forward asking for immunity deals. 1, an older man who'd been on the board a decade, brought recordings from his phone. Blake's voice, crystal clear. I'll bury anyone who gets in my way. And then more. Blake bragging about a whistleblower from his last job who'd had a mysterious accident. Threats to destroy the man's family business if he didn't vote to keep the slopes open. The other 2 board members backed it up with their own emails. Blake detailing exactly how he'd ruined them. Day 96 was brutal. Carmen came back to the mountain for the first time since the avalanche. She never went past the base lodge, just stood staring up at the slope where they'd been buried. She shook all over, even though it was warm inside. I loved skiing for exactly 1 hour of my life, she whispered. Now I can't even look at snow without shaking. Tommy held her hand. His oxygen tank hissed beside him like it was breathing for him. 2 days later, the investigation blew wide open. Forensic accountants uncovered Blake's offshore accounts. Millions in bribes to safety inspectors across Colorado, Utah, Wyoming. The same inspectors had signed off on dangerous slopes at every resort Blake touched. Other resorts panicked. Emergency board meetings. Firings. News crews camping outside every major ski area. Grilling managers about safety protocols. Day 100 was the memorial dedication. 11 stone pillars in a circle, each carved with a name, an age, a dream. The youngest was 8. Her father spoke through tears. She'd wanted to be a ski instructor like Tommy. His voice cracked when he said she was gone because one man decided profit mattered more than lives. 2 days later, Tommy started teaching again. Not regular skiing, but adaptive lessons for survivors injured in the avalanche. His oxygen tank didn't slow him down as he guided a teenage girl on modified skis. She'd lost part of her leg, but managed her first run since the avalanche. Tommy told her, "The mountain didn't betray us. People did." She nodded. On day 104, Blake tried to hang himself in his cell. Guards found him in time. His lawyer immediately claimed a mental breakdown and pushed for a psychiatric facility instead of prison. Rachel was livid. "He's running from accountability again, just like his whole life," she told reporters. 2 days later, resort workers voted to create the 11 Angels Protocol. From now on, any anonymous safety concern meant an automatic slope closure until an independent inspection cleared it. Managers couldn't override it. Firing someone for filing a report would mean criminal charges. Other resorts started pushing for the same rule. Day 108, Dr. Hayes called. The new board hadn't just kept him. They'd promoted him to head of emergency services. He said my fight against Blake had given people courage. Then he asked if I'd consider coming back. I didn't know what to say. Day 110, I started packing to leave town after the trial. In a box of winter gear, I found my old patrol jacket. It still smelled like avalanche debris, sulfur, pine, and death. The shoulder had a tear from when I was digging for Tommy. Bloodstains that never washed out. Evidence tape still clung to one sleeve. I folded it into a box marked Evidence. Day 112, Blake's psychiatrist declared him fit for trial. That same day, leaked hospital footage surfaced. Blake talking defense strategy with his lawyer just hours after his suicide attempt. 2 days later, jury selection began. Blake's team tried to strike anyone who'd ever skied, had kids, or seen the news. The judge wasn't having it. Day 116, I pulled up to Tommy's place and saw him on the porch. No oxygen tank. He stood and took deep, steady breaths. "I want him to see me breathing when I testify," he said. Day 118, the prosecutor called. They'd found Blake's personal journal. She read me the entry from the morning of the avalanche, about me trying to play hero again, and how he'd deal with me after securing weekend profits. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Day 120, trial began. Blake strolled in wearing a $3,000 suit, chin high. Then he saw the gallery, survivors and families, everyone wearing a yellow avalanche beacon pinned to their shirt. His face went white. Day 121, I was on the stand for 7 hours. Every warning I gave, every threat Blake made, every sign we both saw. His lawyer tried to paint me as a rogue patrolman with a grudge, but then they played my helmet cam footage. Blake's voice telling skiers, conditions are perfect, while the mountain crumbled. Day 122, Tommy testified. No oxygen tank. Every step to the witness stand was slow but defiant. He told them about the darkness under the snow, the crushing weight, knowing he was going to die. Blake wouldn't even look at him. Tommy's voice grew stronger. 11 people didn't make it because he chose money over lives. Day 123, Rachel took the stand. She showed videos of Chloe, her daughter's friend, just 14, laughing at her birthday party 2 weeks before the avalanche. Then she pointed at Blake. You murdered that child for $1.2 million in revenue. Day 124, Blake testified. Claimed he'd relied on my expertise, that I'd never conveyed the danger clearly. The prosecutor played his PA announcements, urging people to ski while bodies were still buried. His own lawyer objected to his client's words being played in court. Day 125, the jury went out. 3 hours later, they came back. Guilty, the foreman said, on all 11 counts of involuntary manslaughter. Guilty on fraud. Guilty on conspiracy. Guilty on criminal negligence. Blake's legs gave out. The judge read consecutive sentences that meant he'd die in prison. The gallery cried and held each other. Tommy squeezed my hand. Blake's lawyers tried to get him on his feet, but he couldn't stand. Guards carried him out while he kept mumbling, "This wasn't supposed to happen." The judge thanked the jury, saying justice had been served for 11 souls. Outside, reporters swarmed. I didn't stop. This wasn't about my vindication, it was about the people who should still be alive. I sat in my truck watching families leave the courthouse. Some looked relieved, others empty. Tommy texted that he and Carmen were starting grief counseling. Asked me to join. I said yes. The mountain had taken so much from all of us. But for the first time since the avalanche, I knew Blake was never walking free again. That night, I slept without nightmares. The next morning, I drove back to the courthouse. Families were still gathered outside, some crying quietly, others just staring into the distance, like they'd been hollowed out. Rachel found me in the crowd. She grabbed my arm so tight it hurt. "It doesn't bring them back," she said. "But they didn't die for nothing." Behind her, I saw guards leading Blake out in chains. Ankles, wrists, all of it. His expensive suits were gone, replaced by an orange jumpsuit. He shuffled toward a transport van, head down, no cameras this time. The very next day, the resorts board was all over the news. Complete restructuring. Patrol teams now had absolute veto power over slope closures. All safety reports would go directly to the state, bypassing management entirely. Full settlements for every family, no drawn-out court fights. And just like that, resorts across Colorado started scrambling to fix their own safety policies before investigators came knocking. That night, Tommy and Carmen had me over for dinner. We barely spoke about the trial or the mountain, just passed plates, refilled glasses. Carmen showed me her latest paintings. Deserts, ocean waves, anything but snow. Tommy's breathing was better, 70% lung function now, and when he said, "I'm getting stronger," I knew he meant more than just physically. 2 days later, an official letter came from the Mountain Safety Board. They reversed my credential revocation, called Blake's actions unprecedented coercion, cleared me to work at any resort in North America again. I stared at the certificate for a long time, then shoved it in a drawer. I couldn't imagine stepping onto another mountain yet. At dawn the next morning, I went to the memorial when I knew it would be empty. 11 granite pillars, each with a name carved deep. Another man was there, palm pressed to one of them. We just nodded. Some grief doesn't need words. That afternoon, the head of patrol training called. Asked if I'd teach new patrollers not just avalanche safety but how to stand up to management pressure. I said yes. Somebody had to make sure the next generation didn't get bullied into silence. 3 days later, Blake's sentencing hearing filled the courtroom again. He stood and admitted to every single charge, his voice cracking as he called himself the mountain's enemy. Maybe he hoped it would buy him leniency. Didn't. The judge gave him 165 years, consecutive. No one in that room felt sorry for him. Meanwhile, Tommy was back on the bunny slopes, oxygen rig strapped to his side, teaching a 7-year-old avalanche survivor to trust the snow again. His levels dropped, but his determination didn't. "We don't let fear win," I heard him say between breaths. I was packing boxes to move closer to them when Rachel called. The families were starting a foundation for resort safety reform. She wanted me to lead it. Help us make sure this never happens again. There was no way I could say no. 5 days later, I stood at the resort's new safety center, the one named for all 11 victims. Young patrollers were training, learning that they had the authority to shut down any run, no permission needed. Tommy was beside me, standing tall, breathing without an oxygen tank for the first time since the avalanche. Carmen walked up, not with ski gear, but with 3 cups of hot chocolate. "We survived," she said simply.